Faith begins when our strength ends. This is a profound truth that often takes a lifetime to fully understand, yet it is a cornerstone of the spiritual life. Many people go through life relying on their own abilities, their own understanding, their own willpower to carry them through challenges. They wake up every day believing that they can manage everything, control every outcome, and solve every problem. There is a certain comfort in human strength in the knowledge that we are self-sufficient. But there comes a point in every life when human strength is not enough. There comes a moment when every plan we have made, every effort we have exerted, every strategy we have devised fails to produce the results we need. It is in those moments when our strength ends that faith is born and begins to grow. Faith is not something we can manufacture in the same way we build physical muscles. Faith does not come from force of will or sheer determination. Faith arises naturally when a person reaches the limit of their own resources and recognizes that there is only one source of true power that can meet the need at hand. This recognition is humbling because it requires admitting that we cannot do it alone, that we are not in control of everything, and that our understanding is limited. For many, this admission is frightening. Humans are wired to cling to independence and self-reliance, yet it is precisely in releasing control that faith finds room to flourish. Faith begins not when things are easy, but when everything else has failed. It begins in the quiet desperation of the human heart that realizes human strength has reached its boundary and God's power is the only hope. When we rely on our own strength, we are limited by our knowledge, our experience, and our endurance. We make plans based on what seems possible to us. We push through obstacles, but eventually we encounter situations that surpass our ability to overcome them. This is often the moment of crisis that awakens faith. Consider the countless stories in Scripture where God's people found themselves in impossible circumstances, trapped, outnumbered, and without apparent hope. In each instance, the human response alone would have been insufficient. It was only when they could do nothing more with their own hands that they turned to God with full dependence. And it was then that miracles occurred. Faith begins when human effort reaches its limit and the soul learns to lean entirely on God's strength. Faith is also born in the tension between desperation and hope. When everything seems lost, when every door appears closed, when every plan seems to have crumbled, the human heart has a choice to despair or to trust. True faith does not arise in comfort, it arises in adversity. It is forged in the fire of challenges, tested in the storms of life, and strengthened by the realization that without God, nothing is possible. This is why those who have faced the deepest struggles often develop the strongest faith. Their faith is not theoretical, it is practical, real, and tested. They have discovered that human strength is insufficient, but God's strength is limitless. Faith also begins when we release our expectations and surrender our timelines. Often, we try to force outcomes according to our own schedules, and when things do not happen as we plan, our strength falters. Faith requires patience and trust, an understanding that God is at work even when we cannot see it. When we reach the end of our strength, we are forced to acknowledge that God's timing and power are perfect, and that reliance on Him is the only path to true victory. It is in this surrender that faith grows exponentially, because we are no longer attempting to carry the weight alone. We are allowing God to bear it. The reality of human limitation makes room for divine intervention. When we are exhausted, discouraged, or overwhelmed, it is often the very moment when God's power is most evident. Faith begins at the edge of our endurance, when we can do no more, when we have exhausted every plan, every resource, every ounce of energy we possess. At that point, we turn our gaze away from ourselves and toward God, and in that turning, faith awakens. It is a living trust, a reliance on the one who has the power to do infinitely more than we can imagine. The human heart was not designed to be self-sufficient, it was designed to rely on God. Faith is the natural response when we finally understand that truth, when our strength is gone, and God's power is all that remains. Faith begins when we recognize that nothing we have done or can do is enough, and we step forward with a confidence that rests entirely on God. It is a bold surrender that comes not from weakness alone, but from wisdom and humility, acknowledging our dependence on the divine. This understanding changes how we approach every difficulty, every challenge, and every obstacle, because we no longer rely on our finite resources, but on the infinite power of God. Faith starts at the point where human effort ends, and it is in that moment that the impossible becomes within reach, and our lives are forever transformed. God specializes in the impossible. This is a truth that challenges our natural way of thinking, because human experience teaches us that some things simply cannot be done. We see limits in our strength, boundaries in our knowledge, and obstacles that appear insurmountable. We make plans, we strategize, we do our best, and yet there are moments when it seems that every effort falls short. It is in these very moments, however, that God reveals His nature and His power. He does not specialize in the ordinary or the expected. He does not measure success by human standards. God's work often begins where human capability ends, and His solutions defy natural explanation. The impossible is His domain, and He delights in showing His power through circumstances that leave us with no other explanation. From the earliest pages of Scripture to the life of the believer today, God's people witness His miraculous intervention time and time again. He opened the Red Sea for a nation trapped between water and an army. He provided food in the wilderness for thousands who had nothing. He healed the sick, restored the broken, and even raised the dead. In every story, one truth stands out: God specializes in what seems impossible. He takes situations that appear hopeless and transforms them, not according to human expectation, but according to His perfect will and infinite power. What seems beyond reach to us is routine to Him, because there are no limits to His abilities. When we encounter a problem that overwhelms us, we are not facing an impasse. We are standing on the threshold of God's extraordinary intervention. The impossible often presents itself in the form of human limitations. We are weak, tired, and finite. We encounter obstacles that are beyond our understanding. Financial difficulties, broken relationships, illness, and despair all remind us of our vulnerability. In these moments, it is tempting to give up, to resign ourselves to what seems inevitable. Yet God specializes in these moments. He is not hindered by our weakness, our lack, or our inability. In fact, the very circumstances that make a situation impossible for us often create the perfect stage for His power to be revealed. God does not work in ways that merely support human effort. He works in ways that transcend it. When we acknowledge our inability, we invite Him to display His ability. Faith is the key that opens the door for God to act in the impossible. Belief does not change the laws of nature or human limitations on its own, but it positions the heart to receive divine intervention. Faith is the recognition that God is not bound by what is visible, logical, or predictable. Faith looks at a situation and declares, God, you can do what I cannot. When we trust in His power, the impossible begins to move within the realm of possibility. The difference between those who experience miracles and those who do not is often simply a matter of trusting God to step in, even when every human sign points to failure. God specializes in the impossible, but He requires a heart that acknowledges its dependence on Him. God's timing is also an essential part of His work in the impossible. Often, human beings expect results according to their own schedules. We grow impatient, frustrated, or disheartened when answers do not come immediately. Yet God's timing is perfect. What seems delayed to us is actually orchestrated to maximize His glory and to align with His plan. He intervenes at the precise moment when His power will be most evident. The delay is not denial, it is preparation. God's hand is never too late, and His resources are never insufficient. He specializes in the impossible because He is able to bring about what is needed, exactly when it is needed, in ways that leave no doubt that the work is His. Human logic often limits our imagination. We think in terms of natural possibilities, measurable outcomes, and predictable paths. God, however, operates beyond the confines of logic. What we see as impossible, he sees as routine. Our finite minds cannot comprehend the full extent of his power, yet his works constantly remind us that nothing is beyond his reach. Mountains can be moved, storms can be calmed, and the sick can be healed. The impossible is simply an invitation for God to act. When we surrender control and trust him fully, we create the conditions for his extraordinary power to manifest in our lives. God specializes in the impossible not only for the demonstration of power, but also for the transformation of faith. When the impossible becomes possible, faith is strengthened, hope is restored, and lives are changed. Those who witness his intervention are reminded that they serve a God who is limitless, who is faithful, and who delights in showing mercy and power where human effort falls short. Faith grows in the soil of impossibility because every breakthrough is a testimony that God is who he says he is. The impossible is not a threat to God, it is an opportunity for him to reveal his glory. Faith is not passive, it is powerful. Many people misunderstand faith, thinking it is merely a quiet hope or a private wish, a kind of polite optimism that waits for life to unfold. They see faith as passive because it does not always appear dramatic or forceful. But true faith is far from passive. Faith is an active force, a spiritual energy that moves the heart, transforms the mind, and shapes the course of a life. It is the power that connects the human spirit to the infinite power of God. Faith is the mechanism through which divine possibilities enter into human reality. It does not sit idly by while life happens. It engages, it acts, it reaches, and it persists. Faith is a living, breathing force that can alter circumstances, overcome obstacles, and bring about outcomes that no human strength alone could achieve. Faith is powerful because it aligns the believer with God's will. When we act in faith, we are not relying on our own wisdom or abilities. We are acknowledging a higher source of strength and inviting God to work in and through us. This is why faith is never passive. It requires movement. It requires a turning away from self-reliance and a reaching toward divine power. Faith is expressed in prayer, in obedience, in perseverance, and in trust. It is active because it steps forward when fear would keep us still. It is powerful because it opens the door for God to intervene, to work miracles, and to bring about outcomes that defy natural expectation. The moment we choose faith over doubt, we unleash a spiritual force capable of changing the course of our lives and influencing the world around us. Faith is powerful because it acts in the unseen. While the world measures success by evidence that can be touched, seen, and verified, faith operates in realms beyond the physical. Faith believes before the manifestation, trusts before the solution appears, and acts before the circumstances change. This is the power of faith. It does not wait for conditions to be perfect or for human understanding to be complete.